Elias Thorne topped the ridge and saw the smoke. It was the wrong kind of smoke, not the thin, hopeful column of pine smoke from his own chimney, rising straight in the windless cold. This was a thick, black stain against the pale winter sky. It spoke of grease, of ruin, of violation. He moved faster, his snowshoes sinking deep into the powder. His lungs burned. The high country air was too thin to hold a scream, but one was building in his chest. He came through the stand of aspen, their white bark looking like the bones of forgotten animals, and he stopped. The silence was louder than the fire had been. The cabin was gone. It was just a framework of black, jagged teeth, hissing as the wind scattered snowflakes onto the coals. The roof had collapsed, taking his small, quiet world with it. He walked toward the ruin, his movements slow, numb. The air smelled of burnt pitch and wet ash. His eyes scanned the snow. Tracks. At least a dozen men. Shod horses, not Indian ponies. They hadn't tried to hide their trail. They had wanted him to see. They had come with arrogance. He walked to where his lean-to had been. The stacked cords of firewood were scattered, kicked apart. His butchered elk, hung high from a branch to keep it from the wolves, was gone. They had taken the meat. They had taken the hide. He moved to the cache he'd dug beneath the floorboards, insulated with dry grass. The heavy planks were split open, the axe marks deep and angry. Empty. A whole season of trapping, beaver, marten, fox, was gone. Months of brutal work vanished into the pockets of cruel men. His Hawken rifle, the one that hung on pegs over the hearth, was gone. His powder horn, his sacks of lead, his flints. They hadn't just stolen from him. They had sentenced him to die. He kicked at the debris. He found the single tin cup he drank his coffee from. It was bent, thrown 50 yards into a snowbank. He picked it up, his leather glove brushing the snow off. It was the only thing they had left him. He looked around again, his eyes stinging from the smoke. They had been thorough. They had emptied his traps, smashed his skinning tools. But they had missed one thing. Under a drift of snow, near the creek bed where he washed his skins, lay a dark bundle. He walked to it. He brushed the snow away. It was his heavy winter robe, a prime buffalo, cured and oiled against the wet, its fur thick and deep, his last coat, his only remaining possession of value. He pulled it around his shoulders. The weight was familiar, comforting, but it offered no warmth against the chill that was rising from inside him. The sun was dipping behind the peaks. The light turned a cold, bruised purple. The real cold was coming. The killing cold. He looked at the tracks leading east, back toward the settlements, back toward the whiskey forts and the trading posts. He knew who had done this. Silas Rook. A man whose handshake was as cold as a snake's belly. A man who believed the mountains belonged to whoever was ruthless enough to take them. A man who saw honor as a weakness. Elias stood in the ashes of his life, wrapped in a single robe, and watched his breath freeze in the air. The world he knew had ended, and a new one, a much harder one, had just begun. The fire crackles low, the wind moves through the pines. A story settles in the heart when it's told in the dark, out here, where the world is big and the sky is full of stars. It's good to have company on a cold night. If you're listening, let the folks around the fire know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment below. We've got a long night ahead, and the cold is deep. But the story isn't over. It's only just begun. It hadn't always been this way. Elias hadn't come to the mountains to fight. He had come to listen. He had left the noise of the east, the crowding, the judging. He had come west to find something quiet, and he had found it. He found a different kind of company, the mountains themselves, the cry of the eagle, the silence of the snow, and the people, the Kusiuta, the Shoshone. They called themselves the Stone Eaters. He had met their chief, Many Stars, 3 winters back. It was not a meeting of friends at first. It was a meeting of boundaries. Elias had trapped a beaver near their sacred pass. He had not known. He was skinning the pelt when 5 riders appeared on the ridge above him. They were silent. They did not raise their weapons. They simply sat on their ponies, watching. Elias saw the disapproval. He saw the strength. He had done the only thing he knew. He stood up slowly. He wiped his hands. He opened his pack, took out his pouch of tobacco and offered it, his hand outstretched. He had apologized. In the few words of their tongue he knew. He respected their land. He had made a mistake. He would not trap there again. He would leave the pelt. Many stars had watched him for a long minute. Then he dismounted. He walked to Elias and took the tobacco. A quiet understanding was formed. Elias learned their ways. He learned that the Wapiakani, the Medicine House Valley, was where their ancestors were buried. It was where their young men went for their vision quests. It was not a place for steel traps. Elisha lived beside them, not among them, but in peace. He traded knives and good wool blankets for dressed hides and knowledge. They taught him which roots to pull to stop a fever, which snows meant avalanche, which wines carried the promise of a blizzard. He taught them how to repair a steel trap, how to sight a rifle barrel that had warped. It was a balanced world. Then, last fall, Silas Rook had arrived. Rook didn't come with one horse. He came with 20. He led a line of rough men who smelled of whiskey and greed. Rook saw the valley not as a home, but as a warehouse. He saw the Shoshone not as a people, but as an obstacle. He had sought Elias out, riding right up to his cabin. "Thorn," he'd said, his voice slick like oil on water, "you're sitting on the richest beaver stream in the territory, but you're soft. You're sharing with the Reds." Elias had just stared at him, his hand near his axe. "It's their land, Rook. I'm just passing through." Rook laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The land belongs to whoever can hold it. I'm building a fort, a trading post, right here in this valley. The Kusiuta won't like it. They'll come, and when they do, my men will be ready. I'm offering you a chance, a partnership." Elias's gut went cold. Rook wanted to build on the Wapiakani, on their graves. "I'm offering you a share," Rook pressed, "or you can get out of my way." Elias had looked at the cold, empty eyes of the man. "They are a people of honor, Rook. They keep their word. You should try it." Rook's smile vanished. "Honor is a fool's luxury, Thorn. I deal in lead and steel. You have until the first deep snow. Be with me or be gone." Elias had turned his back. It was the deepest insult he could offer. "I'm not going anywhere, and you won't build your fort on their graves." Rook had sat on his horse for a long moment. "Then you'll be gone," he whispered, "one way or another." The first deep snow had come 3 days ago. Now Elias stood in the ashes of that promise. Rook had kept his word. The attack hadn't been a fight. It had been an execution of a home. Elias was miles away when it happened, checking his high traps on the flank of the mountain. He heard the shots echo up the canyon. It was not the single, measured boom of a hunter taking meat. It was a volley, a scattered, ragged celebration of cruelty. His blood went cold. He ran. He left his traps, his snowshoes, everything. He ran, sliding down scree slopes, leaping over deadfall, plunging through drifts. He was too late. By the time he got to the ridge overlooking his cabin, he saw them, Rook's men. They were loading his furs, his winter's work, onto their pack mules. They were laughing. He saw Rook himself, sitting on his big black horse, watching, directing. Elias gripped the small skinning knife at his belt. It was all he had. He was hidden in the pines. He was one man against 12. He watched. He watched them smash his door. He watched them pour his small bag of sugar into the dirt. He watched as one man, a big man with a red beard, carried out his possessions and tossed them onto a pile. They were taking his life apart, piece by piece, for sport. He wanted to charge, to yell, to die fighting. But he knew the cold math of the mountains. A dead man saves no one. He stayed still. His heart hammered against his ribs. A trapped bird. He watched as Rook dismounted. Rook walked into the cabin, then came out with a torch he'd lit from the hearth. "That's for the fool's honor," Rook's voice carried on the clear, cold wind. Let the cold teach him what gone means. He tossed the torch onto the dry pine shingle roof. It caught instantly. The flames roared up, bright orange against the white snow. The men cheered. They mounted up. They rode east, laughing, their mules heavy with his labor, leaving the fire to do the rest of their work. Elias waited an hour. He waited until their tracks were just distant marks in the snow. Then he came down. He walked through the ruin. The heat was already dying. The cold was winning. He found the buffalo robe. He pulled it on. He was shaking now, not from cold, from a rage so pure it was almost silent. He looked at the tracks. He looked at the dying sun. He couldn't follow them, not like this. They had left him to die, but he wouldn't. He would survive. He would find a way. He would not go east. He could not. He would go west. He would go to many stars, not to ask for war, not to beg for help, but to bear witness, to tell them what Rook intended for their sacred valley. He owed them that warning. He owed himself that. He turned his back on the tracks of his stolen life. He turned west, toward the high peaks, toward the winter camp of the Shoshone. It was a 3-day walk, even with a horse and supplies. Without them, without food or a rifle, it was a death march. He put his head down, leaned into the wind, and took the first step. The first day was a blur of white. The wind came up, a high, keening sound that seemed to come from inside his own skull. It flayed his face. The buffalo robe was heavy, but the wind found every gap. He had no food. He chewed on pine needles. The bitterness kept him awake. It kept the hunger at bay. He kept his hands tucked deep in the robe, crossed over his chest. He knew the signs of frostbite, the numbness, the waxy white of the skin. He had to keep moving. By the second day he was lightheaded. The world seemed to shimmer at the edges. He fell often. He would lie in the snow, and the warmth of giving up called to him. It felt like a warm bed, just rest. But the image of Rook's laughing face pulled him up. The image of Many Stars' quiet, dignified face pulled him up. He wasn't walking for himself anymore. On the third morning, he crested a ridge and saw the frozen river. He knew the Shoshone winter camp was 2 miles north, tucked in a bend of the cottonwoods. He almost wept with relief. He stumbled down the bank, his legs failing, and then he saw it, a small shape, a bundle of furs huddled against a cottonwood trunk. He thought it was a fox or a small wolf. Then it moved. It was a child, a small boy, no more than 6 winters. He was wearing decorated skins, but they weren't enough for this wind. He was shaking, his face blue, tears frozen on his cheeks. Elias recognized him. It was Tivkuni, Little Rabbit, the son of Many Stars. He must have wandered from the camp tracking a rabbit, and the storm had caught him. The wind had hidden his tracks. Elias knelt. "Little Rabbit," he said. His voice was a raw croak. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with fear and cold. He couldn't speak. He was too cold. Elias looked at the boy. He looked at his own robe, his last defense, his only warmth, the hide that stood between him and the end. To give it away was to die. The camp was still 2 miles away. He didn't know if he could make it, even with the robe. He didn't know if he could make it another 10 steps. He looked at the child. This was the son of the man who had shown him respect. This was a life that hadn't even begun. He saw Rook's face again in his mind. Honor is a fool's luxury. "No," Elias whispered to the wind. Slowly, his frozen fingers fumbling, Elias unwrapped the heavy buffalo robe from his own shoulders. The wind hit him like a physical blow, a blade of ice. His body screamed. He wrapped the robe tight around the small boy. The child instantly burrowed into the fur, his shaking slowing. Elias picked him up. The boy was light, but Elias was already spent. He put the boy on his back, holding him with one arm, and began to walk. Each step was agony. He couldn't feel his feet. He couldn't feel his hands. He just moved. He walked. He fell. He crawled, dragging the boy. He wasn't walking. He was just moving toward the distant smoke. He fell a final time at the edge of the trees, where the smoke from the lodges was visible. He couldn't get up. He pushed the boy, wrapped in the robe, toward the light. "Go," he whispered. "Run." Then the world went dark. He woke to warmth. He was in a lodge. The air was thick with the smell of sage and boiling roots. A woman was placing a hot stone, wrapped in leather, against his feet. He was alive. He felt a dull pain, a deep ache, but the numbness was gone. Many Stars was sitting across the fire. The chief's face was stone. He just watched. Elias tried to sit up. "The boy," he croaked. "My son is safe," Many Stars said. His voice was flat, without emotion. "He is warm. He was wrapped in your robe." "You were not," Elias nodded. "He was lost. The cold was on him." Many Stars continued to stare, his black eyes seeming to look through Elias. "You gave him your last coat. You carried him. You saved the son of a chief. This is a debt that cannot be paid." Elias finally sat up, pushing away the furs. "There is no debt. He was a child. The wind was strong." Many Stars stood. "The wind is always strong," the chief said. "A man's spirit is not." He walked to the lodge door and held the flap open. "Now, you will tell me why a man with your honor is walking to his death in the snow," Elias told him. He told him everything. He told him about Rook, about the stolen furs, about the burned cabin. He told him about the threat to the Wapia Kani, the Medicine House Valley. He told him Rook was moving men in, to build a fort, to trap out the sacred streams, to defy the Shoshone. As he spoke, the chief's face darkened. This was not just an attack on a white trapper. This was an attack on the Kusiuta. When Elias finished, there was silence in the lodge. Many Stars looked out the door into the night. "You came to warn us," he said. "Even after you had lost everything, you came to protect our land." Elias nodded. "It was all I had left to do." Many Stars pulled the lodge flap wide. "Look," he commanded. Elias moved to the door. He looked out. The night was clear, the stars bright, and the hills surrounding the camp were alive. They were dotted with light, not one or two, hundreds, 1,000, torches, moving in lines, warriors gathering. "What is that?" Elias whispered, his voice full of awe. "It is the debt," Many Stars said. "You saved one life. You saved the blood of my blood. Now all my warriors will save the land you tried to protect. Rook wanted your valley. He will find the mountains have guardians." They rode at dawn. It was not a war party. It was a nation, 200 warriors, their faces painted, their lances bright with feathers. Elias rode a strong-backed pony, wearing a new robe, finer than his last. He carried a rifle Many Stars had placed in his hands. They did not ride fast. They rode with purpose. They arrived at the sacred valley just as the sun broke the eastern peaks. Rook was there. His men were already felling trees, the thud of their axes echoing like gunshots. They were planning their fort. They saw Elias first. They laughed. "Look! The ghost!" The man with the red beard shouted. "Come back to die proper!" Then they saw Many Stars, and behind him the ridges, lined with warriors. They rose from the snow, from the pines, silent as the frost. The laughter died. Rook's face went pale. He was trapped. Rook raised his hand. His men froze, dropping their axes. They were good at bullying one man. They were not ready to fight a people. Many Stars rode forward, his horse picking its way through the snow. Elias rode beside him. The Shoshone warriors fanned out, silent. They formed a perfect, inescapable circle. Rook's men bunched together, their bravado gone. "Thorn!" Rook spat, his voice shaking. "You brought them. This is a white man's dispute." Elias looked at him. "You made it their dispute when you put your axe to their sacred trees." His voice was quiet, but it carried in the cold, still air. Many stars looked at Rook. He did not speak of violence, he spoke of balance. "You are like the wind," the chief said to Rook, his voice deep. "You come, you make noise, you knock things over, but you do not belong. You do not build, you only break." He pointed to the trees Rook's men had cut. "You have scarred the land. You have scarred my friend. This cannot be." Rook looked at the wall of warriors. He knew he was beaten. "What do you want? Blood?" Many Stars shook his head. "We are not you. We do not take pleasure in ruin." He pointed back east, the way Rook had come. "You will leave. You will leave the axes, you will leave the rifles, you will leave the mules, and you will leave my friends' furs." At his signal, 2 warriors brought forward the heavy bundles of pelts taken from Rook's camp during the night. "You will walk home. The snow will be your teacher. It will teach you what gone means." Rook's men looked terrified. To walk back without supplies, without weapons, was a death sentence. The same sentence they had given Elias. "You can't," Rook yelled. Elias spoke then, his voice cutting through. "You can," he said, "if you walk fast." He looked at Many Stars. "It is enough." The chief nodded. The warriors watched, their faces like stone, as Rook's men, disarmed and humiliated, began the long walk. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw animal fear. They vanished over the ridge. Elias looked at the valley, the cut trees, the stolen furs. Many Stars put a hand on his shoulder. "A wound heals," the chief said, "but an act of honor lives. You gave my son your robe. You gave him your life. The Kusiuta do not forget. This valley is your home, our home." The spring came late that year, but it came. The snow receded, revealing the green underneath. The valley breathed again. The Shoshone helped Elias rebuild his cabin. It was stronger this time. It was built not just with logs, but with friendship. The scars on the trees began to heal. Elias set his traps, but he never again went near the sacred pass. He had learned the difference between surviving in the land and belonging to it. He was no longer a solitary man. He was a neighbor. He would share smoke with Many Stars by the fire. He would watch Little Rabbit grow, a boy who always smiled when he saw the white trapper. The buffalo robe Elias had given him now hung in the chief's lodge, a symbol, not of debt but of connection. Silas Rook was never seen in that high country again. The mountains had a way of sorting souls. They tested a man, found what he was made of. Some, like Rook, were made of hollow greed. They were brittle. They were broken by the test. Others, like Elias, were made of something quieter, something stronger. The wind still blows through that valley. The eagles still circle. The story of the trapper and the child is still told when the nights are long and the fire burns low. It is a story about the cold. It is a story about courage, but mostly it is a story about warmth. It teaches that true strength isn't measured by what a man can take or what he can hold. It isn't measured in rifles or furs or forts. It is measured in the end only by what he is willing to give away. It is the great paradox of the high country, that a man's last coat, given in kindness, can be warmer than 1,000 fires. It can shine brighter than 1,000 torches. If you enjoyed this story, stay a while longer by the fire. There are more tales from the high country, where honor rides the wind.